With all the attention on the refugee crisis, Obama has pledged to carve out space in the U.S. for those escaping war and violence.
Each of us do our part, and the United States has to step up and do its part.
Platitudes aside, there's already a humanitarian crisis at America's doorstep. Due to extreme poverty and violence across Central America, there's a massive number of people fleeing for their lives. Violence in the region has also pushed a startling number of unaccompanied children to the border. In 2014 alone, nearly 47,000 children without parents were arrested while crossing into the U.S. from Mexico, a 92% increase from the previous year. Instead of helping these refugees, Obama's taken on the legacy of deporter-in-chief by ejecting humans at a higher rate than any U.S. president. During the first 5 years of his term, Obama oversaw the deportation of 2 million people, more than Bush's entire tenure. Families are being torn apart by these policies. In 2014, 4,500 families were deported between October and November alone. During the same 2-month period in 2015, the number skyrocketed to 12,500. Staying up to speed, the Obama administration ordered a new wave of raids to kick off the new year, kicking down the doors of hundreds of sleeping women and children, uprooting countless more families. But to get here, these families risked everything, and most will risk it all again. Beyond the shocking numbers of arrested, jailed, and deported is the hidden side of the war on immigrants. It's a war that doesn't just have prisoners, but fatalities, thousands of them. The land itself becomes a weapon. Before 1994, there were as few as 5 bodies of migrants found in the Arizona desert per year. Since 1994, state officials have registered over 7,000 human remains, over 200 per year. But many of the bodies are never found. Because the traditional points of entry are now militarized, people have no choice but to go on the most perilous journeys through the desert, risking their lives in extreme temperatures for days, sometimes weeks, with an array of dangers. In response to this huge humanitarian crisis, many dedicated people in border states have organized life-saving support. Organizations like No More Deaths in Arizona trek miles across the desert to strategically leave water and food for passing migrants, an act that saves countless lives. The Empire Files crew went to the Arizona-Mexico border on one of its latest missions. So Chris, where are we right now?
We are south of the town of Maricopa, which is in Pinal County, Arizona. We try to make a trip every weekend here to either one side or the other of this mountain because there are trails where we find garbage that definitely came from south of the border.
People don't realize that these people really are facing extremely perilous travel to try to survive and help their families.
Ever since the border militarization, the traditional porous border where people come to work and then take the money back home with them doesn't work for them anymore. Once you cross the border, it's like you don't want to go back and do that again. And instead you send for your family. And so over the past 15 years, more younger people have been found. One of my friends who got a ticket for littering, the first one that I know of, found a 14-year-old girl.
Oh my God. How long was she out there?
They had been looking for her for 2 weeks, so she, and it was in the winter time too, so she probably froze to death. And we have a monument there where they found her.
Yeah. traumatizing. Despite doing nothing but providing humanitarian aid, activists leaving water in the desert have been slapped with such outrageous offenses like criminal littering, comparable to corporations' toxic dumping, to smuggling and aiding and abetting terrorists.
Unfortunately now, 11 years later almost, I don't think any of us thought that we would still be having to do this work at that time. We were in an emergency mode because the death rate had gone up so dramatically that we just knew we had to get out there and we had to get medical care out in the desert and look for people in distress.
In terms of the militarization of the border, what policies are being put in place that are kind of driving people out farther and farther into more desolate drop-offs and paths?
So the funnel effect is all part of the plan. It's all part of Border Patrol's strategy to push people into ever more dangerous areas as a form of deterrence. And so what we've seen is that we now have to operate in areas that are further north, like where we are here, and further west than ever before, because certain areas are shut down by enforcement, and it's like squeezing a balloon. People are just going to go another route into more distant, more remote areas.
Deaths have increased dramatically as an intended result of Border Patrol in one of the most cruel tactics ever employed by the U.S. government. Border Patrol settles itself strategically across the border to force migrants onto the most dangerous, death-defying routes. In its own internal document from 1994 laying out this strategic vision, it says, "The prediction is that with traditional entry routes disrupted, illegal traffic will be deterred or forced over more hostile terrain. Crossing through remote, uninhabited expanses of land and sea along the border can find themselves in mortal danger. The inhumane logic is that death will be the deterrent, that if enough people die in the desert, the horror stories their mourning families will spread will scare people from coming all together."
Unfortunately, all we've seen is all death and no deterrence. And so in a lot of ways, that policy is successful. Right. It's done exactly what it was meant to do, and it was set out to force people through dangerous areas and to use the desert as a graveyard.
Yeah.
And then if you get through, then you can come and, and work for little pay and be exploited by employers in the U.S., but that's if you get through the gauntlet.
In such brutal conditions, water is heavy to carry and runs out quickly. Coming across water in the desert can literally mean life or death. No More Deaths looks for clues for migrant routes to hide water, such as clothing like the shoes in a backpack we found on the third site we went. Messages of encouragement are written on the bottles. They must be strategically placed so it could be seen by passing migrants, but not too obvious that it could be noticed by Border Patrol or militias, who go out of their way to vandalize and destroy the water, an utterly heinous act, knowing it results in death.
We definitely see an increase when there's more militia in the area, or vigilantes, or even hunters during that season. But then when it comes down to it, we know that it's Border Patrol sometimes. They have a memo from their supervisor, from the chief, that they shouldn't vandalize humanitarian aid supplies. We know that it definitely happens.
I don't care. I don't care at all. So you get a good shot. Picking up this trash somebody left on the trail. It's not yours, is it? All you have to do is tell me, is it yours?
So what's most common is slashing. And so you can see that someone just took like a razor to it and just slashed the whole bottle. Sometimes they're perfectly poured out, just with the lids off. And other times, what's most disturbing is people will write messages on the bottles or do things to the bottles like adding coloring of some sort that makes the water, that who knows what it does to the water, what they're actually adding to it, and makes it so that the water's there, yet in a very cruel way, it's not going to be trusted. I think to destroy water in a desert is one of the most vicious things that you can do for all life. Water is extremely symbolic and significant in the desert. And so I think to destroy it sends a much larger signal. You know, how anyone could believe that it's okay to kill someone who's trying to feed their family, who's just trying to come and get back to their family. It's beyond me, and I think it really does have to do with racism.
Yeah. People that have been in need of medical attention and have actually been left behind by the people who are leading the pack.
Exactly, and that's the people. In terms of the people who die, it usually is because they have been left behind. Yeah. Maybe they tripped and they fell at night, and then they twisted their ankle, and so they can't keep up with the group. Or very commonly, the Border Patrol has a tactic of dusting with helicopters, where they come down upon a group because they know where groups are moving. They can see all of that. And they'll come down and dust them, get really low. And it's this very violent experience where all the rocks and everything is kind of in the air. It's a really loud noise. People are horrified. They scatter. You fall, you run, you get completely lost and completely separated from your group. And that's a way for them to divide the group up and then try to round them up. Or we stop the truck and we look up, and just, you know, on the side of the road was a man that was laying under a tree. And so we jump out of the vehicle and run over to him and are tapping his feet, and he's clearly not dead, and you know, checking his pulse. He's alive, and he's laying there, and we're all around him, and he opens his eyes and he looks up at me, and he says in Spanish, "Are you angels?" And I cry every time I tell the story. And you know, I said, "No, we're here. We're from the church. We're just people that want to help you." And he really had laid down thinking that he was laying down to die that day.
The Colibri Center for Human Rights is just one of several border organizations that help migrant families identify the remains of lost loved ones. Colibri's database contains records of 2,500 bodies, 900 of which remain unidentified.
Each one of these binders represents a year, and these all contain the records for unidentified persons found in that year. So for a county of this size, this is really remarkable that we have to have binders this large. This tells me that this is an adult female, most likely, who was about 5'2", had been dead more than 2 years, and was found in Pinal County. Here in Pima County, we have almost 900 people who haven't been ID'd. Something I never expected going into this work is that, you know, making a death notification, that you would be thanked for that. And I think it's because people are in this, like I said, like a living nightmare, and like they don't have any answers, and so actually having the confirmation of death is seen as a blessing in some way. One would think this is the worst news in the world, but it just shows you how the pressure we're putting people under and the inhumane kind of conditions that people are faced with when they actually thank somebody for telling them that their son has died. The vast majority are exposure, but some years the vast majority are undetermined because they're skeletal remains and there's no real way to tell. But by and large, it's exposure to the elements, so dehydration, hypothermia, hyperthermia, heat stroke. From what I understand, it's a very painful death. It's a very disorienting, scary, terrifying way to go. You know, oftentimes when people are found, they're found with their clothing items strewn about. You know, they've walked in circles. They've tried to dig into the ground. They've tried to find shade, or, you know, we've had people who've committed suicide in the last moments because they couldn't take the pain. One that I can think of is a man hung himself with barbed wire. The fact that we have, on average, about 170 of these kind of deaths just in southern Arizona every year is really just a massive humanitarian disaster. People aren't dying because there's no water in the desert. People are dying because policy put them in the desert.
Many fighting for their lives in the desert are picked up by Border Patrol to be jailed and dumped back across the border. The first place they encounter in Nogales, Mexico is El Comedor, a place that provides a meal and some dignity to migrants freshly ejected from the U.S. Their stories are harrowing. Yanette was just released from a private prison in Arizona and deported to Nogales, where she awaits her husband. She has no money and no way to communicate with him.
Un día y una noche, pero sin parar. Pues él, al llegar yo a la carretera, él llamó al levantón, pero llegó primero su levantón de él, se fue y no dejó. Tanto sufrimiento, caminé mucho.
¿Y agua? ¿Tenías agua y comida?
Ya se me había acabado. Mi esposo me la daba todo porque yo no tanto la aguantaba. Dolor de mi pie, donde las caminaba quedaba, que no aguantaba, pero a veces no aguantaba, mi esposo me cargaba, todo me hacía. Ya faltaban 2 horas al llegar a la carretera, pues, porque todo el tiempo caminé y ya, verdad, ya no aguanté y me desmayé. Y mi esposo, pues, ahí pues se asustó y llevamos un guía que nos perdió. Era un niño de 17 años y nomás nos fue a entregar con la migración. Entramos y ahora al caminar nos vio la revisión y ya los 2 guías dijeron corran. Corrimos, nos echamos a perder. Ahí lo agarraron, anduve 3 días perdida. Y ya después no aguantaba porque no llevaba agua, no llevaba comida. Me entregué y me llevaron a migración. Tuve 5 días en la hielera con mucho frío, en el piso. Yo le decía que me lastimaban los esposos de mis placas, de mi pies. Me dijeron que no, que era seguridad para él.
Racist, hysterical media coverage paints immigrants as a threat, as violent criminals who want to come to this country to steal its benefits and take good jobs. The truth is that 75% of the people attempting to enter the U.S. are already integrated into the economy and community, having already worked here for an average of 9 years. Half have a family member that's a U.S. citizen, and 1 out of 5 migrants surveyed had a child with U.S. citizenship under the age of 18. Just like you and me, migrants are human beings who, above all else, want safety and security for their family. Like Jorge, who's preparing to make the terrifying trip across the open desert.
Soy nacido de allá, quiero cruzar para Estados Unidos por mis 2 hijos que dejé ya en Estados Unidos. Nosotros llegamos aquí hasta con miedo llegamos y con la gente que hay aquí, nosotros no lo conocemos y llegamos hasta con miedos aquí. Y todo pregunta dónde vas y qué indicas y tanto pregunta ellos y no sé por qué ellos quieren saber de eso. Muchos miedos y tristezas, porque imagínate si me pasaría algo aquí, pues lo voy a dejar abandonado a mis hijos allá. Estados Unidos está muy cabrón. Y más importante, mis hijos. Para eso estoy haciendo una lucha para poder llegar aquí a Estados Unidos.
Fear of the desert is joined with fear of Border Patrol, always on the lookout with drones, sensors, and camera towers. An entire army deployed to round up as many as possible and send them to a court you would expect to find in a fascist country. Border states have taken their own initiatives to take expelling human beings to a whole new level. In the land of justice for all, imagine a mass trial where hundreds of refugees from Central America, still covered in sweat and sand from their journey, are shuffled into a massive courtroom, shackled and chained at their ankles and wrists. The only sound, the clanging of metal. A judge tries upwards of 80 of them at a time. Assembly line style, they rotate from the pews to the stand to hear their charges for the first time, enter a plea, and receive a sentence, all within around 30 seconds each. Texas Federal District Court Magistrate Judge Bernardo Velasco bragged to the media about his personal record, sentencing 70 immigrants within 30 minutes. Then they're all shuffled away on up to 180-day sentences straight into a private, for-profit prison, where corporate jailers pocket around $120 a day per prisoner. The mass trials give them close to 100 new bodies per day, per courtroom. This is Operation Streamline. It's such a dystopic side of American society that the courts won't allow cameras to capture what has been likened to a modern-day slave auction.
Do each of you understand the rights you're giving up, the charges against you, the maximum penalties of those charges, the consequences of pleading guilty, and the terms of your written plea agreement? Mr. Cordero?
Sí. Yes.
Mr. Gregorio?
Sí. Yes.
Mr. Catalan?
Sí. Yes.
Mr. Alvarez?
Sí. Yes.
Mr. Booth?
Yeah. Yes.
As to all 5 defendants, it is the judgment of the court that they are found guilty of the petty offense of illegal entry. Mr. Serrano is sentenced to 75 days. Mr. Ramos is sentenced to 75 days. Mr. Lopez is sentenced to 75 days. Mr. Segura is sentenced to 180 days. Mr. Lugo is sentenced to 180 days.
Me gustaría, si me pudiera mandar hace mi tiempo a Carolina del Norte. Lo que pasa es que mi razón de venir es porque tengo casi 11 años que no veo a mis hijas. Entonces, de alguna manera quisiera verlas.
Created in 2005 by Homeland Security and the Department of Justice, Operation Streamline has drastically increased immigration prosecutions. So much so that it's a main driver of the expansion of private prisons, including injecting more than $1.2 billion into the for-profit prison system in Texas alone. And it's all on the taxpayers' dime. In Arizona, public funds of around $120 million go into Operation Streamline court proceedings. The process completely denies defendants due process protections and effective assistance from legal counsel, so-called hallmarks of our justice system, where 55% said their lawyers simply informed them that they had to plead guilty. In addition, the process is so rapid that it doesn't allow defendants who qualify for asylum status, a legal right to refugees fleeing imminent death, any time to request it. Only after their prison sentence are they asked if they want to claim asylum. But in the historic spirit of fighters against racist institutions like slavery and Jim Crow, our visit to Streamline was not the typical rapid-fire trial they wanted.
Ustedes no son culpables, hasta este corte es culpable. Los escrituras dicen que benditos los inmigrantes. Scripture tells us to welcome the migrant. Scriptures say when the Son of Man comes in his glory, he will say, blessed are you who welcome those blessed are those who welcome the migrant. Blessed are those who welcome the stranger.
One by one, clergy members in the audience stood up to disrupt the proceedings.
Your Honor, I have on many occasions attended this hearing, and in each time I now want to say what I remained silent for before, and that is, this is a travesty of justice, the Constitution, and human rights.
You can talk as you can talk. Hermano, tú no eres culpable. Este corte es culpable. La sistema es culpable. Is this not the fast that I choose? To loosen the chains. It's a little rough.
The Lord defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow. He loves the foreigners residing among you, giving them food and clothing. You are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners.
The mass kangaroo court has little impact on migration at all. Most everyone jailed and deported under Streamline will make the life-threatening trek through the desert all over again. Only a quarter sent to jail say they won't try to return. Who knows how many expelled by these courts will end up just another body in the graveyard at our border. And the only way to end this humanitarian crisis is unearthing the real causes.